Within 48 hours of General Kim Dae's death, every military base on Earth hummed with activity that had not been seen since World War III. Colonel Choi Hana stood in the Pentagon's war room watching as massive screens filled with data that should have been impossible, according to every intelligence report the aliens had about Earth. The numbers climbing on those screens told a story that would have shocked the Galactic Empire if they had known the truth. Humanity's space fleet was not the small collection of primitive rockets that alien scouts had reported decades ago. Hidden shipyards and asteroid belts had been building warships for 30 years. Weapons labs on the dark side of the moon had been perfecting plasma cannons. And energy shields, research stations scattered throughout the outer solar system had been reverse engineering every piece of alien technology that had ever fallen into human hands. Admiral Yoon Tae walked into the war room with the bearing of a man who had been preparing for this moment his entire career. His weathered face reflected years of secret planning and hidden preparations. When he looked at the tactical displays showing the true size of Earth's military forces, he allowed himself a small smile that would have terrified any alien who saw it. "How many ships do we actually have?" Admiral Choi asked, as she pulled up holographic displays that showed fleet positions throughout the solar system. The numbers that appeared made even the experienced military officers in the room gasp in surprise. "More than they think," Yoon replied with satisfaction in his voice. "The Empire's intelligence about Earth is over 3 decades old. They think we still have chemical rockets and primitive nuclear weapons. They have no idea about our quantum jump drives, our particle beam cannons, or our AI-controlled fighter swarms." The secret was finally coming out. While the Galactic Empire had been conquering other worlds with their superior technology, humanity had been doing something completely different. They had been stealing, adapting, and improving everything they could get their hands on. Every crashed alien probe had been studied and copied. Every piece of debris from distant space battles had been analyzed and reverse-engineered. Every sensor reading from passing alien ships had been used to understand their weaknesses. Human engineers had spent 50 years taking apart alien technology, like children, taking apart toys to see how they worked. But unlike children, humans put everything back together in ways that were better than the original designs. They took alien plasma weapons and made them more powerful. They studied alien shields and found ways to punch through them. They examined alien engines and built versions that were faster and more efficient. The weapons development labs hidden beneath the Rocky Mountains had been working around the clock for decades, creating hybrid technologies that combined the best of human innovation with stolen alien science. The result was a military force that looked primitive on the surface, but packed surprises that would shock any enemy who underestimated Earth. But technology was only part of the story. The real weapon that humanity possessed was something the Galactic Empire could never understand or replicate. It was the fire that burned in the heart of every human soldier who had volunteered to fight for their world, private. Kim Soo had lost her older brother in the Soul attack, and she carried his dog tags as she trained with weapons that could cut through alien armor like butter. Her hands never shook when she practiced with plasma rifles. Her aim never wavered when she ran combat simulations against alien battle tactics. She fought not because someone ordered her to, but because she had chosen to make the aliens pay for what they had done to her family. Sergeant Park Jin watched his 8-year-old daughter practice hiding in the basement shelter he had built beneath their house. When she asked him if the aliens were really coming to hurt them, he knelt down and promised her that no alien would ever touch her as long as he was alive. The next day, he volunteered for the most dangerous assault unit in the Space Marines. Captain Lee Min had grown up listening to his grandfather tell stories about fighting the Japanese in World War II and later fighting the Chinese in World War III. His grandfather had always said that Americans never stayed down when they were hit. They got back up and hit twice as hard. Li Min felt that same warrior spirit flowing through his veins as he prepared to lead his company against enemies from the stars. The Galactic Empire had built their military, using conscripts and slaves, species that fought because they were forced to fight soldiers who obeyed orders because disobedience meant death or worse. Their armies were disciplined and well-equipped, but they lacked something that could not be manufactured or programmed. Every human soldier carried something the Empire's slave armies could never possess. They fought because they wanted to fight. They served because they believed in what they were protecting. They were willing to die, not because they were ordered to, but because they had something worth dying for. The Empire was about to learn why Earth had never been successfully invaded in all of human history. It was not because humans were the strongest species in the galaxy, or the smartest, or the most advanced. It was because when humans were pushed to the breaking point, they became something else entirely. Something that refused to break, no matter how much pressure was applied. Admiral Yun Tae stood before a gathering of every senior military officer on Earth and delivered a speech that would be remembered for centuries. He told them that the Empire expected Earth to surrender without a fight. They expected to find a primitive species that would beg for mercy. When faced with superior technology, they expected humans to behave like every other species they had conquered. Instead, the Empire was going to discover something that had never happened in their 1,000-year history of galactic conquest. They were going to find a species that fought back. They were going to encounter resistance that grew stronger instead of weaker under pressure. They were going to face an enemy that turned every disadvantage into an advantage and every defeat into motivation for victory. The meeting ended with orders that spread to every corner of the solar system. Fleet commanders received sealed instructions that made them smile with anticipation. Marine generals activated training programs that pushed human soldiers beyond their limits. Scientists working on classified projects were given unlimited budgets and told to ignore safety regulations. Earth was preparing for war, but not the kind of war the Galactic Empire expected. It would not be a quick conquest followed by occupation and enslavement. It would be a fight that would shock the galaxy and change the balance of power forever. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was angry. The Galactic Empire's first wave hit Earth's outer defenses like a tsunami of steel and fire that should have swept away any resistance in minutes. Admiral Song Ki commanded the Seoul Defense Fleet from his flagship, watching through the main screen. As enemy dreadnoughts tore through space with weapons that could crack moons in half, the alien ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with energy shields that had never been penetrated by any enemy in 1,000 years of conquest. The Empire fleet consisted of over 2,000 warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their weapons could destroy cities with single shots. Their shields could absorb the energy of exploding stars. Their engines could cross interstellar distances in days instead of months. Every alien commander expected this battle to end within an hour with complete human surrender. Instead, they encountered something that had never happened in the Empire's long history of galactic domination. Humanity fought back with coordinated fury that defied all known military logic and tactical doctrine. The human fleet did not scatter and run as expected. Instead, they charged directly into the teeth of the alien formation using tactics that should have resulted in immediate annihilation. Captain Nam Su led her destroyer squadron in what appeared to be suicide runs that violated every principle of space combat taught in military academies across the galaxy. Her ships dove between the massive alien dreadnoughts, firing weapons at point-blank range while alien gunners tried desperately to track targets moving faster than their computers could calculate. "Their shields are adapting to our energy weapons," Nam reported over the communication system as her ship shook from near misses by alien plasma cannons. "But they are not expecting kinetic rounds moving at 90% of light speed." The humans had discovered something the Empire had forgotten in centuries of easy victories. They had turned basic physics into a weapon more deadly than any energy beam. Railguns launched tungsten slugs at speeds that made them invisible to alien sensors. The projectiles punched through energy shields that could stop laser fire, and tore holes in armor that had never been damaged before. Lieutenant Beha screamed with joy as her fighter squadron dove between two massive alien cruisers. Her missiles split apart at the last second, releasing thousands of tiny warheads that found weak spots in the enemy armor that human engineers had identified from studying captured alien ship designs. Each warhead was guided by artificial intelligence systems that learned from every missed shot and adapted their targeting with each attack. The Empire commanders stared at their tactical displays in growing confusion. Their overwhelming numerical advantage meant nothing when humans fought like they had nothing left to lose. Their superior technology was being countered by enemies who used speed and unpredictability instead of raw firepower. Their perfect battle formations were being torn apart by fighters that moved like earth insects, darting and weaving in patterns that no computer could predict. Admiral Song Ki watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction as human ships swarmed around alien dreadnoughts like angry wasps attacking giants. The aliens had expected to fight an orderly battle between organized fleets. Instead, they found themselves in a chaotic melee where every human ship fought independently using tactics that seemed completely insane, but somehow worked. Colonel Park Du led a squadron of assault ships in a direct attack on the Empire flagship. His ships were tiny compared to the alien dreadnought, but they moved with precision that confused enemy gunners. The human pilots had trained for years in Earth atmosphere where they learned to fly through storms and dodge mountains. Now they used those same skills to navigate between alien weapon beams. The key difference was not technology or numbers, but something the Empire had never encountered before. Humans fought because they chose to fight. Every pilot and gunner and ship captain was there because they wanted to protect their world and their families. The Empire armies were made up of conscripts and slaves who obeyed orders because they had no choice. When Beha's fighter took a direct hit from an alien plasma cannon, she did not eject and try to save herself. Instead, she aimed her damaged ship at the enemy cruiser that had shot her and rammed it at full speed. Her last words over the radio were for her parents back on Earth, telling them she loved them and that she was proud to die fighting for freedom. That single act of sacrifice inspired every human in the battle. Captain Nam Su pushed her damaged destroyer beyond its design limits to rescue the crew of a crippled human frigate pilot. After pilot followed Beha's example, turning their damaged fighters into guided missiles that struck alien ships where their shields were weakest. The Empire had never faced an enemy that grew more dangerous when things looked hopeless. Their slave armies became less effective when they started taking casualties. But humans seemed to fight harder when their friends were killed. Their determination increased when their ships were damaged. Their courage grew stronger when victory seemed impossible. After 6 hours of brutal combat, the impossible happened. The mighty Galactic Empire fleet began to retreat. Their ships that had never been damaged were burning and listing through space. Their formations that had conquered 1,000 worlds were broken and scattered. Their commanders, who had never tasted defeat, were running back to hyperspace with damaged pride and damaged ships. Admiral Song Ki stood on the bridge of his flagship looking at the debris field that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. Burning alien ships drifted between the wreckage of human vessels that had sold their lives dearly. The Sol Defense Fleet had lost over half its ships, but they had done something no other species in galactic history had accomplished. They had made the Galactic Empire bleed. The battle was broadcast live to every human settlement in the solar system. Children in school watched their parents fight impossible odds and win. Workers in factories saw ordinary people become heroes. Families hiding in shelters witnessed the moment when humanity proved they could stand up to the greatest military force in the galaxy. But the real victory was not measured in destroyed ships or alien casualties. It was the moment when every human being realized that the empire could be hurt. The moment when fear turned into anger. The moment when a species that had never fought a galactic war understood that they could not only survive, but win. The Empire fleet limped back to their staging area with news that would shock their high command. Earth was not going to surrender without a fight. The primitive humans had weapons and tactics that no Empire database contained. Their military was larger and more advanced than any intelligence report had suggested. Most importantly, they fought with a ferocity that made them dangerous beyond their numbers. The Empire had expected to add another slave species to their collection. Instead, they had found something that would haunt their dreams. They had found humans at war. General Kim Day never thought he would die on a Tuesday morning in Seoul. The most decorated officer in the U.S. Space Command had lived through 3 alien contact missions and survived 2 deep space wars against hostile species. He had seen plasma, cannons melt through battle cruisers, and watched entire planets burn under alien bombardment. But nothing had prepared him for what happened on that quiet morning when he was driving to his office. The attack came without warning. Purple energy beams cut through his armored convoy like a hot knife through butter. The first beam hit his lead vehicle and turned it into molten metal in seconds. The second beam struck his own car, but somehow he survived long enough to see his attackers. They wore no uniforms and carried no flags, but their weapons told a story that made his blood run cold. These were not human weapons. These were Galactic Empire weapons, the kind that could punch through titanium armor like it was made of paper. Kim Day tried to reach for his communication device to warn Earth Command, but another purple beam found its target. The last thing he saw was the Seoul skyline burning in the distance as more alien ships descended from the clouds above. The greatest military mind on Earth died not in glorious battle, but in a simple ambush on a city street. And with his death, everything changed. President Park Min sat in the Oval Office 12 hours later staring at security footage that made his hands shake with rage. The video showed everything in perfect detail. The alien attackers moving with impossible speed, their weapons firing beams of pure energy that no human technology could stop. The way they vanished into thin air after completing their mission, leaving no trace except for the smoking remains of Kim Day's convoy. But what came next made the president understand that this was not just an assassination. This was a declaration of war. The alien ambassador arrived at the White House exactly 6 hours after the attack. A tall creature with silver skin and 4 arms walked through the front door as if it owned the place. The Secret Service could not stop it. Their weapons did nothing to the creature. The bullets simply bounced off its skin like raindrops. The ambassador spoke in perfect English with a voice that sounded like metal scraping against stone. It delivered the Galactic Empire's message with cold precision that sent chills down every human's spine who heard it. General Kim Day had been marked for death because he refused to hand over Earth's quantum defense codes. The Empire wanted humanity to kneel and become another servant species in their vast collection of conquered worlds. Secretary of Defense Li Bo stood beside the president, her hands shaking as she held the alien translation device. The creature continued speaking, explaining that Earth had exactly 72 hours to surrender completely. All human military forces must lay down their weapons. All human governments must step down. All human leaders must report to Empire processing centers for evaluation and possible termination. The ambassador made it clear that resistance was pointless. The Galactic Empire had conquered over 10,000 worlds in the past millennium. They had weapons that could crack planets in half and ships that could travel between stars in days. Human technology was primitive compared to theirs. Human military forces were tiny compared to their vast armadas. The Empire could destroy Earth completely, or they could make it into another slave world. The choice was up to humanity. President Park Min listened to every word without speaking. His face remained calm, but inside he felt something awakening that had been sleeping for decades. Something that his grandfather had told him about when he was a child. Stories about fighting impossible odds against enemies who thought they were stronger. Stories about Americans who refused to quit even when everything looked hopeless. When the ambassador finished speaking, Park Min stood up slowly. His voice was quiet, but every person in the room could hear the steel in his words. He told the alien creature that humanity would need some time to consider their offer. The ambassador nodded and said they would return in exactly 72 hours for Earth's answer. Then it walked out of the White House the same way it had walked in, leaving behind only the smell of ozone and the promise of total destruction. The moment the alien left, the building Park Min turned to his advisors and gave orders that would change human history forever. He activated every emergency protocol that had been created since the first alien contact 50 years ago. He called every world leader and military commander on the planet. He sent coded messages to secret bases that most people did not even know existed. Within 1 hour, every military installation on Earth was buzzing with activity. Soldiers who had been on leave were called back to duty. Scientists who had been working on classified projects were told to work faster. Engineers who had been building experimental weapons were given unlimited resources. The sleeping giant that was human military power began to wake up, but the real change was happening in the hearts and minds of ordinary people around the world. News of General Kim Dae-S assassination spread faster than any government could control it. Social media exploded with anger and determination. People who had never thought about war suddenly understood that their freedom was at stake. Their families were in danger. Their entire species faced extinction or slavery. In Seoul, Kim Dae-S' widow, Captain Kim Soo, held her husband's medal and made a promise that echoed in military bases. Around the world, she would make the aliens pay for what they had done to her family. In New York, Sergeant Park Jin watched his daughter cry when she heard the news on television and swore that no alien would ever make his child afraid again. Los Angeles Captain Lee Min remembered stories his grandfather had told him about fighting impossible odds in World War II and felt the same fire burning in his chest. The Galactic Empire had made their first critical mistake. They thought that killing one general would break humanity's spirit. They believed that showing their superior technology would make humans surrender without a fight. They assumed that Earth was just another primitive world that would collapse at the first sign of overwhelming force. They had no idea what they had just awakened. Humans were not like the other species the Empire had conquered. They did not fight just because they were ordered to. They fought because they chose to when their families were threatened. They became something dangerous. When their freedom was attacked, they turned into warriors. When someone tried to make them kneel, they stood up and fought back twice as hard. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years by crushing resistance, before it could grow. They had perfected the art of making other species give up hope. But they had never faced a species like humanity, a species that grew stronger when things looked hopeless, a species that refused to quit, even when the odds were impossible. A species that would rather die fighting than live as slaves. President Park Min stood at the window of the Oval Office, looking up at the stars that twinkled in the night sky. Somewhere up there, alien fleets were probably already moving toward Earth, preparing for an easy conquest. They expected to find a primitive world filled with scared creatures begging for mercy. Instead, they were going to find something that would change the galaxy forever. They were going to find humans, and humans did not surrender. What had started as Earth's desperate defense against impossible odds became something the galaxy had never witnessed before. A human war machine that grew stronger and more dangerous with every battle fought. Colonel Lim, stood in the command center of a captured Empire battleship, studying alien star charts with the hungry eyes of a predator who had just discovered new hunting grounds. The enemy had made their biggest tactical mistake yet. In their arrogance, They had shown humanity exactly where their other worlds were located. Every star system under Empire control, every slave planet producing resources for their war machine, every strategic outpost that protected their supply lines. The aliens had handed Earth the keys to their entire galactic empire. Intelligence Officer Omin sat at an alien computer terminal, her fingers dancing across controls that had been designed for creatures with 4 arms instead of 2. She had learned to read Empire databases in record time. Discovering secrets that would have taken other species decades to uncover, they rule through fear and intimidation. Omin explained to the gathered human commanders, their slave species obey because they believe the Empire cannot be defeated. When we start winning battles, when we start freeing their conquered worlds, everything will change. The human fleet had evolved from a defensive force protecting Earth into something completely different. They moved through space like the ancient Viking. Raiders striking fast and hard at targets the Empire never expected to be attacked. Human ships appeared in star systems that should have been impossible to reach, hitting supply convoys, communication relays, and isolated outposts before vanishing back into hyperspace. But the real breakthrough came when Captain John Yu made contact with the Keth resistance fighters on Proxima Station. The bird-like aliens had been fighting Empire occupation for over 50 years, hiding in caves and underground, tunnels slowly losing a war of attrition that had cost them millions of lives. Their rebellion was dying when the first human Marines landed on their world. The meeting between humans and Keth took place in a bombed-out building that had once been a school. Captain Yu and his team found themselves face-to-face with aliens who looked like giant eagles, with tool-using hands and eyes that burned with decades of hatred for their oppressors. "We have been waiting for someone like you," the Keth leader, named Thek Ra, said through a translation device, his voice filled with hope that had been absent for years. "We know every tunnel on this world, every hiding place, every weakness in their defenses. But we do not know how to hurt them badly enough to make them leave." Yu smiled with the expression of a teacher who had just found eager students. "We will show you how to fight dirty," he promised. "The Empire thinks in terms of massive battles and overwhelming force. They do not understand guerrilla warfare or asymmetric tactics. You know the territory. We know how to hurt things that are bigger and stronger than us." Within weeks, human advisors were training Keth fighters in tactics that Earth soldiers had perfected over centuries of warfare. How to make explosives from common materials, how to set ambushes that would devastate enemy patrols, how to strike at infrastructure targets that would cripple Empire operations without risking major battles. The results exceeded every expectation. Empire garrison forces that had controlled Proxima Station for decades found themselves under constant attack from enemies they could not catch. Supply convoys were destroyed by bombs planted in seemingly safe locations. Communication towers were sabotaged by fighters who vanished into tunnels before reinforcements could arrive. But the most important change was not military but psychological. For the first time in 50 years, the Keth began to believe they could actually win their young. Warriors who had grown up accepting defeat as inevitable started talking about driving the Empire completely off their world. Their elders, who had watched rebellion after rebellion fail, began planning for a future without alien occupation. The same pattern repeated itself across dozens of star systems as human strike teams made contact with resistance movements that had been fighting hopeless battles for generations. The Vorthan rebels on Beta Centauri learned how to turn their enemies' superior technology against them. The Zephyrian freedom fighters in the Arcturus system discovered how to coordinate attacks across multiple planets simultaneously. Every victory brought new allies, new resources, and new intelligence about Empire weaknesses. Human engineers studied captured alien equipment and found ways to improve it. Human tacticians analyzed Empire battle doctrines and developed counters that exploited their predictable strategies. Human diplomats negotiated alliances with species that had never worked together before. Captain Li Bin commanded a mixed fleet of human ships and captured Empire vessels crewed by liberated slaves who fought with the fury of people who had nothing left to lose when his task force hit the Empire. Stronghold at Wolf 359. They did not just defeat the garrison, they inspired every slave on the planet to rise up in coordinated rebellion. The Empire High Command watched their tactical displays with growing alarm as red dots representing human. Attacks spread across their territory like a plague. Reports flooded in from commanders who could not understand how primitive Earth forces were defeating their advanced military units. How were humans moving so fast? How were they coordinating attacks across such vast distances? How were they turning Empire slaves into effective rebels? The answer was something the Empire had never encountered in 1,000 years of conquest. Human warfare was not about technology or numbers or superior firepower. It was about turning every disadvantage into an advantage, every defeat into a lesson, every enemy's strength into a weakness to be exploited. Admiral Park. Sue stood on the bridge of her flagship as it emerged from hyperspace in the heart of Empire territory. Her mixed human and alien crew worked together with efficiency that would have been impossible under Empire rule. Former slaves fought alongside their human liberators, united by shared hatred of their oppressors and shared hope for freedom. The human tide was not just a military force. It was an idea that spread faster than any fleet could travel. The idea that the Empire could be defeated. The idea that slaves could become free. The idea that small groups of determined fighters could bring down the greatest military power in galactic history. On 100 worlds across, Empire space slave species whispered about the impossible humans who fought without fear and won battles. They should have lost aliens who had successfully rebelled against their masters and lived to tell about it. Rebellions that actually succeeded, instead of ending in mass executions. The Empire had ruled through the belief that resistance was futile, that their technology was too advanced to be countered, that their military was too powerful to be defeated, that their control was too complete to be broken. But humanity had brought something to the galaxy that the Empire had never faced before. Hope backed up by the knowledge and weapons, needed to turn that hope into reality. The human tide was rising, and nothing in the galaxy would be the same again. 6 months after General Kim Dae's assassination, Ambassador Song Ha stood in the ruins of the Empire's greatest palace watching alien refugees line up for human relief supplies. The war was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. A galaxy full of freed slaves had to learn how to live without masters, and humanity had to decide what kind of future they wanted to build. The palace that had once housed the most powerful ruler in galactic history now served as a distribution center for food, medicine, and basic supplies. Beings from hundreds of different worlds who had spent their entire lives following orders suddenly found themselves free to make their own choices. Many of them had no idea where to start. They keep asking us to rule them, reported Humanitarian Coordinator Park Sue, her voice tired from weeks of non-stop negotiations with refugee leaders. The vegan collective wants Earth to become their new government. The Centauri tribes are begging us to send administrators to organize their worlds. Even the former Empire Guard units are requesting human commanders. Ambassador Song shook her head, remembering the conversation she had with President Park Min before leaving Earth. The president had been very clear about humanity's intentions. "We did not fight this war to become conquerors," he had said. "We fought because someone killed our people and thought we would surrender without a fight. We fought to make sure no species would ever be enslaved again." The human response surprised everyone in the galaxy. Instead of claiming the Empire's territory as the spoils of war, they offered to help establish independent governments on each freed world. Instead of demanding tribute or resources, they negotiated trade, partnerships that benefited both sides. Instead of ruling through military occupation, they provided advisors who taught other species how to govern themselves. The process was not always smooth. Some worlds had been under empire control for so many generations that their populations had forgotten how to make decisions without orders from above. Others descended into civil war as different groups fought for power that had been denied to them for centuries, but slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to heal Captain Lee. Doe commanded a joint task force of human ships and vessels crewed by former Empire slaves. Their mission was to hunt down the remaining Empire loyalists who had fled to the galaxy edge and were trying to establish new slave territories using refugees who did not understand they were free. The work was dangerous and often heartbreaking. Doe's forces would arrive at refugee camps to find beings who had been recaptured by Empire remnants and forced back into slavery. Children who had never known freedom were taught that humans were their enemies and that the Empire would protect them from the chaos of independence. We cannot force them to be free. Doe reported after liberating a camp where half the refugees tried to return to their Empire captors. They have been slaves for so long that freedom terrifies them more than chains. But there were also moments of incredible joy when the Joint Task Force arrived at the mining world of Kepler 442. They found that the former slaves had organized themselves into a functioning democracy complete with elected leaders and a constitution based on human documents they had studied in secret. The freed beings of Kepler 442 had named their new nation the Kim Day Republic in honor of the general whose death had started the war that gave them freedom. They had built a memorial to him in their capital city with an inscription that read in dozens of alien languages, "He died so we could live free." News of humanity's approach to peace spread across the galaxy faster than any military fleet could travel. Species that had expected Earth to establish its own empire instead found humans offering partnership and friendship. Former enemies discovered that humanity was more interested in building trade relationships than extracting tribute. The Galactic Liberation Conference convened on Earth 1 year after the Empire's fall. Representatives from over 3,000 worlds gathered in Geneva to establish the framework for what would become the Free Worlds Alliance. The conference lasted 6 months and produced the Galactic Charter of Rights, which guaranteed basic freedoms to every sentient being in the galaxy. General Kim Dae's funeral had been attended by representatives from 300 worlds who came not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to honor the man whose death had freed them all. The ceremony was broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy and watched by trillions of beings who had never been allowed to honor their own fallen heroes. Ambassador Song Ha delivered the eulogy, standing before an audience that included humans, former slaves, former Empire soldiers, and beings whose species had never been in the same room together. Before she spoke about sacrifice and freedom, about the price of liberty and the responsibility that came with it, General Kim Dae never wanted to be a martyr. She said her words carried by translation devices to every corner of the galaxy. He wanted to serve his people and protect his world, but his death became something greater than any of us could have imagined. It became the spark that lit the flame of freedom across 10,000 worlds. The Empire had killed one human, general thinking it would demonstrate their power and break humanity's will to resist. Instead, they had created a symbol that would inspire rebellion and hope for generations to come. Every freed slave world had monuments to Kim Dae. Every resistance movement that fought against oppression carried his name as a battle cry, but perhaps the most lasting change was not political or military, but cultural. The galaxy had learned something from humanity that the Empire had tried to destroy for 1,000 years. The idea that every being deserved to be free, that differences in species or technology or culture did not give anyone the right to enslave others. The Free Worlds Alliance grew from 3,000 member worlds to over 8,000 in Just 5 years, trade flowed freely between species that had been enemies for centuries. Technology was shared openly instead of being hoarded by military elites. Art and culture flourished as beings who had been forbidden to express themselves finally found their voices. Admiral Park Ji now served as the Supreme Commander of the Alliance Defense Force, a position she had never wanted but accepted, because someone had to make sure that no new empire could rise from the ashes of the old. Her fleet consisted of ships and crews from dozens of different worlds, all united by their commitment to protecting freedom. The galaxy was not perfect. There were still conflicts between different species, still worlds that struggled with the transition. From slavery to independence, still groups that tried to establish their own small empires. But now, there was something that had never existed before. A galactic community committed to stopping such attempts before they could grow when the remnants of the old empire tried to establish a new slave territory in the Andromeda sector. They found themselves facing not just human ships, but a combined fleet from 50 different worlds. Species that had been enemies under the Empire fought side by side to prevent anyone from rebuilding what they had all suffered under. The battle was over in hours. The would-be emperor and his followers found themselves outnumbered 1,000 to 1 by beings who remembered what slavery felt like and refused to let it happen again. Ambassador Song Ha retired from diplomatic service and returned to Earth, where she wrote the definitive history of the Liberation War. Her book became required reading in schools across the galaxy, not because any government mandated it, but because parents wanted their children to understand the price of freedom. The galaxy belonged to everyone now, and it would stay that way because 10,000 worlds remembered what it was like to be slaves and were determined never to be slaves again. They remembered the species that had taught them how to fight for their freedom, and they made sure that humanity's sacrifice would never be forgotten. The Galactic Empire had lasted 1,000 years and ruled over trillions of beings. But it would be remembered only as a cautionary tale about what happened when power was concentrated in the hands of those who believed might made right. Humanity would be remembered for something much more important. They would be remembered as the species that taught the galaxy that freedom was worth fighting for, and that no being should ever have to kneel before another. The Empire had made their final fatal mistake when they underestimated what humans would do when their people were murdered. Now the galaxy was free, and it would remain free because humanity was watching and they were not alone. The Galactic Empire had ruled over 10,000 worlds for a millennium, but they had never seen anything like Admiral Park Ji's final offensive human battle fleets struck everywhere at once, moving faster than Empire communications could track. Them appearing in star systems that should have taken months to reach and disappearing before enemy reinforcements could respond. Empire Fleet Marshal Vex Tar stared at his tactical display in the central command bunker on the Empire throne world, watching red warning lights multiply faster than his staff could count. Human attack groups were hitting targets across half the galaxy, simultaneously striking at infrastructure that had been considered completely safe for centuries. How are they moving so fast? Vex Tar screamed at his intelligence officers as another report came in of human ships materializing deep behind Empire defensive lines. His 1,000-ship armada positioned to defend the Empire's core worlds found itself surrounded by enemies that had somehow jumped across impossible distances in days instead of months. The secret was pure human innovation, combined with the kind of reckless courage that had brought them through every impossible situation in their species. History. While the Empire used stable hyperspace routes that took weeks to traverse safely, humans had weaponized their own willingness to take insane risks. Commander On-Si led the experimental jump fleet that made the final offensive possible. Her ships could tear holes in space-time itself, creating temporary wormholes that lasted just long enough for assault fleets to pour through. The process was incredibly dangerous, with a 30% chance that any ship making the jump would be torn apart by dimensional forces. Jump successful. C reported as her ship emerged in the heart of the Empire capital system, her hull glowing white-hot from dimensional stress and her crew barely conscious from the gravitational effects. We are inside their primary defense grid. All human ships' weapons free. The battle for the Empire throne world lasted 18 hours and rewrote every military manual that had ever been written. Human Marines fought building by building through alien cities that had never seen warfare, while overhead, captured Empire ships turned their massive weapons on their former masters. The aliens had built their empire on the belief that superior technology and overwhelming numerical advantage could crush any resistance before it could become dangerous. They had never imagined facing an enemy that did not fight to win, but fought to make absolutely certain their opponents lost. Captain Ko Min led his Marine battalion in the assault on the Empire Central Command Complex. When they found themselves surrounded by enemy forces with no hope of rescue, they did not surrender or retreat. Instead, they turned the massive building into a fortress and held it against impossible odds. "We are not leaving," Ko Min told his troops as alien plasma fire lit up the night sky around their position. "This building contains the communication systems that coordinate their entire military. If we can hold it long enough, our fleet can cut off their ability to organize a counterattack." The battle inside the command complex became legend among human forces. Ko Min's Marines fought room by room against aliens who were twice their size and armed with weapons that could punch through any armor. When they ran out of ammunition, they fought with knives and improvised weapons. When those broke, they used their bare hands. Private Nam Ho found himself trapped in a corridor with 3 Empire soldiers, each one armed with energy weapons that could cut him in half. Instead of surrendering, he charged them with a piece of broken metal, screaming at the top of his lungs. His sacrifice allowed his squad mates to reach the main computer center. The Empire leaders who had ruled the galaxy from their secure bunkers watched in horror as their capital burned around them. Their personal guards, who had never lost a battle, fled in panic when human assault teams reached the Imperial Palace. Their escape ships were destroyed by human fighters who had somehow infiltrated the most heavily defended system in the galaxy, but the real collapse was happening across the Empire territory. On hundreds of worlds, slave species were rising up with human weapons and training that turned their desperation into effective military action. The galaxy's greatest empire was falling apart, not because humanity was stronger, but because they had taught everyone else how to fight back. The Keth rebellion on Proxima Station had grown into a full-scale war that drove Empire forces completely off their world. The Vorthan resistance in the Beta Centauri system coordinated simultaneous attacks that destroyed every Empire installation in 12 star systems. The Zephyrian freedom fighters had captured the regional Empire headquarters and were broadcasting calls for rebellion to every slave world in their sector. Emperor Zul Cathex himself stood in the ruins of his throne room, watching human soldiers search through the wreckage of his palace. He had ruled over trillions of beings, across thousands of worlds. But when the human commander approached him, he saw something in the alien eyes that he had never seen before. "You will not kill me," the Emperor said with as much dignity as he could manage. "I am prepared to negotiate terms for surrender." The human commander, whose name tag read Colonel Kim Yu, looked at the alien ruler with an expression that mixed contempt with something that might have been pity. "We are not here to negotiate," she said simply. "We are here to make sure this never happens again." The empire that had lasted 1,000 years died not with a massive battle, but with a simple broadcast transmitted from the captured throne world. Human technicians working with liberated alien engineers sent a message to every world in the galaxy. The Emperor was dead. The Empire was finished. Every slave species was free to govern themselves. The response was immediate and overwhelming. On 10,000 worlds, beings who had lived their entire lives under alien rule suddenly found themselves free to make their own choices. Some worlds descended into chaos as different groups fought for control. Others formed new governments based on democratic principles they had learned from human advisors, but most simply, celebrated the end of a nightmare that had lasted longer than most species could remember. Children who had never seen the sky without Empire ships overhead looked up at stars that belonged to them. Parents who had worked in slave factories walked out and went home to their families. Leaders who had been executed for speaking about freedom were remembered as heroes who had died for a cause that finally succeeded. The galaxy was in flames, but they were the flames of freedom, not conquest. The Empire had burned, but from its ashes rose something that had never existed before. A galactic community where different species worked together as equals, where no one world ruled over others, where freedom was protected by those strong enough to defend it. Admiral Park G stood on the observation deck of her flagship, watching the last Empire Loyalist ships flee toward the galaxy edge. Her mixed crew of humans and former slaves worked together with an efficiency that the Empire had never been able to achieve. They were united not by fear or force, but by shared commitment to preventing any species from enslaving others ever again. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. A galaxy full of freed slaves had to learn how to live without masters. Species that had been enemies for centuries had to learn how to work together. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources had to be rebuilt and restored. But for the first time in 1,000 years, every being in the galaxy could look up at the stars and know they were free. And they knew that freedom would be protected by the species that had taught them how to fight for it. The Empire had made their final mistake when they killed General Kim Day, thinking it would break humanity's spirit. Instead, they had awakened something that changed the galaxy forever.